This is TechSNAP, episode 373. Welcome to TechSNAP, Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly systems network and administration podcast. This episode is brought to you by our three great sponsors, iXSystems, Ting, and DigitalOcean. I'll tell you more about those great sponsors as this here show goes on. My name is Chris, and it's just me for now. However, I'm about to be joined by one Mr. Allan Jude. Of course, Wes is there, Jed, and straight out of California, aspiring sysadmin himself, Jeff, will sit down. Now, Wes comes in a little bit later in the conversation because the guys sat down at a table, we had the mics on, and they just started chatting, as good friends often do, especially when we all share a trade. And that's managing these crazy systems and constantly watching the news. So the guys kicked off a great conversation. And now, thanks to Wes's traveling, he's somewhere beautiful in the world right now. And the fact that I'm getting on a plane here in a few hours to go back to Texas, well, it opened up an opportunity to share this conversation with you.
Welcome to this special live segment of TechSNAP. I almost said BSD now. Here live from Linux Fest Northwest, and I'm joined by my temporary co-host here, Jed. Welcome, Jed.
Greetings. Hi.
Yes, and we have our also special guest, Jeff. Hello, Jeff.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. So the top story that stuck out for me this week, as I was in Chris's RV driving up here, I got the alert on my phone that the Toronto Stock Exchange and the Montreal Stock Exchange were shut down early. And all trading was halted. And there was wild speculation about what might be going on. I was like, oh, God. It's like, I was thinking a couple of minutes ago, I got nothing to do. I should check on my stocks. And I was like, nope.
Oh.
I don't even want to know. It's like, things were going up, and then the stock exchange shut down. It's like, and there's like, well, was it a flash crash? And it's like, no, it doesn't seem like that. And so we got more updates here from last night saying that it was a technical issue and it wasn't caused by cybersecurity attacks. They like to say that. And the operators of the exchange said it's actually hardware failure. It's like, isn't this shit supposed to be redundant?
Like, you had one job.
Well, because on Friday, they were like, we hope to resume trading on Monday. It's like, that doesn't sound like the level of confidence I'm hoping for.
That's amateur.
Yeah. So the operators of the Toronto Stock Exchange and the Montreal Stock Exchange says trading will resume normally Monday after the hardware failure forced markets to close early on Friday.
Well, everyone wants a 3-day weekend. So.
Yeah. Well, and they close at like 2 o'clock or 1:30 or something like that. It's a little weird. But anyway. So the TMX Group, which is the company that runs the stock exchanges, said in a statement late Saturday evening that the hardware failure occurred in their central storage appliance for the trading system. So I'd love to know more about that. I'm guessing a NetApp or an EMC, some kind of SAN.
And just one of them, probably, which is always a mistake.
Well, maybe it's a cluster, but, those never work as good as you hope.
Yeah, like, you have to do a pull-the-plug test on your stuff.
Yeah. So what was really funny is the original news article for it had related stories at the bottom. And it's like, new CEO of TMX talks about how laying off half their employees will make them much more agile. It's like, I wonder if these two things are related.
Oh, God, I can't help but laugh.
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
Let's get rid of most of the sysadmins. We don't need them. All this stuff is computerized. And then, oh, look, our central storage server has just fallen over.
Any idea on the file system they were using?
No idea what the file system they were using.
If they're using something like an EMC or a real big storage appliance.
It's all custom.
Yeah.
So like NetApp is 1FS? No, that's Isilon.
Oh, gosh.
What's the NetApp file system called? I don't remember.
It's not worth knowing.
It's a modified version of FreeBSD's UFS that supports up to 256 snapshots. So it actually has like a bitmap array, so there's a limit on how many snapshots you can have.
Wow, that sounds like LVM.
Yeah, so in each inode, there's a 256-bit bitmap that indicates which snapshots this block is in. Oh. And only when it's all 0 can they free the block. And that's how they do snapshots on the NetApp file system. which I can't for the life of me remember what the name of it is off the top of my head. I don't know much about the EMC, but the NetApp is based on FreeBSD. And then, so maybe if they had a central SAN like that, what they should look at maybe is the Isilon from Dell. Well, Dell acquired the company recently, which is a clustered thing that maybe would be more resilient to failure than whatever they had here.
Yeah, seriously.
But it definitely seems like, ZFS was the answer here, as it is for everything, in my opinion.
Well, and more than one.
Yes. Well, exactly. You need something like the iXSystems M50, where you have multiple heads and they fail over, but you're using SCSI reservations to make sure that both nodes don't try to write to the disk at once and corrupt things.
Yeah.
Although for the TSX, you might need something even more complicated than that, where maybe ZFS isn't the right answer, but whatever they had definitely didn't work in this case.
True. It's possible that they had two storage appliances and an active-passive thing, and the passive one couldn't power up.
Yep. Or the passive one was out of sync, or it got into a split brain condition, and it's like, I don't know what is safe. I don't know that I don't have old copies of blocks that I wasn't syncing or something, and they just didn't go forward. Or, maybe they're both too close together and were affected by a common failure of some kind.
Maybe there was a power surge and it took them both out.
Batteries. People really forget the amount of maintenance it takes for a giant UPS bank.
Yeah.
Those had to be tested and the batteries replaced all the time. Like on really good ones, they have a separate sensor on like every battery, and they have to monitor those. So Jeff, tell us a bit about batteries. You know about batteries?
Yeah, I do. I mean, it really depends on what they're using, but I mean, a big part is you got to have everything balanced too. So even if a cell goes out of balance, then they're screwed. I mean, you got to get that thing replaced, and doing that while not taking out your power is a huge thing, because a lot of these batteries have pass-throughs. So if you're going to disconnect it, you're going to disconnect power to the server anyways, right? So maybe what's that free and open battery storage thing that they got going on? I can't remember the name of it. Maybe that'll have a better play into something in the future, where we have a standard on these UPS backups that would probably help out a lot more. But for now, I'm guessing most of these things are probably just using standard lead-acid batteries, and I mean, those don't last forever. They definitely don't last forever. They can't cycle that many times, and they definitely need a lot of maintenance. So that can definitely fail. Yeah,
like when I worked at the power plant, and I looked in there, they had a kind of not custom, but a little bit different UPS than you normally see in like a data center. And it literally just looked like an oversized refrigerator just full of car batteries all strung together. It had a giant switch on the side that went clunk when it switched over.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Wow.
Yeah. But like I've also heard stories of at data centers, when they have enough techs in the data center, unlike maybe TMX has now, they walk around with an infrared scanner and actually check the temperature and look for the batteries that are too hot, because they know those ones are the ones that are going to give out on them when shit hits the fan.
Oh, because your resistance inside your battery changes as it starts to crystallize.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not only that, I mean, you got temperature, you got connection strength. Everything's got to be torqued properly, and if you're relying on, say, a bunch of server admins to take care of something electrical, do they have electrician on staff? That's kind of something, or even a good service tech on staff for that kind of thing, because nobody really wants to mess with that. I mean, that's a lot of power, even though it's probably 12 volt being inverted. That's still a lot of power. It could be very dangerous.
It's a hell of a lot of amps.
Yeah, it's
hell of
definitely
a lot of amps. Yeah.
Outside of the expertise of your regular, rack monkey.
Right. Yeah, and it's you drop a screwdriver on those things, it's a big boom.
Yeah.
Especially something that big.
Yeah, people kill themselves with just 110 in their house.
Yep.
So yeah, it's good to be cautious around that stuff, and you don't want to lay those people off.
Yeah, and I had similar experience at the very first data center Scale Engine used, and it was actually the day we were moving out. And so we were scheduled to go there at 2 o'clock and start moving half of our equipment to the new data center. And then a week later, we were going to move the other half. Maybe it was when we were moving the second half, actually. So all the machines were configured on their next boot to switch to the configuration for the new data center. But there was a big power outage in the city at like 10 o'clock that morning. And it turns out when the company when we moved into the data center, it was a local cable company, but a big national one came and bought it and laid off most of the people and so on. And didn't have an on-staff electrician at the site anymore because they were planning to not have it as a data center but just use it for their own internal stuff. And because of lack of maintenance and testing, the transfer cable or whatever between the generator and the ATS had corroded. And so when the power failed, everything went to batteries and it was fine. And as the batteries ran down, the generator started up and was providing power, and the power didn't make it into the building. And then the batteries ran out and everybody's stuff went off. And eventually the power company restored power, and all my machines powered up thinking they were in a different city with a different network configuration. And back then we were using the NIS, so kind of like LDAP, so the half of the password file and everything came from a directory services thing,
Yellow Pages,
which it couldn't reach anymore. And so like any command you try to do at the console waited 2 minutes for that to time out before, like, so you start top and it spent 2 minutes trying to turn the user IDs into usernames, failed, and then finally started. So trying to, and the room is full, like every sysadmin in the area is in this tiny room right now because everybody's stuff had been offline and they're all trying to get all their stuff back online. So you're like elbowing people, and like we only had half the rack, we had the top half, and so there's somebody like trying to work underneath me at like my knees and I'm trying not to like hit him in the head, and I'm like balancing a keyboard on my hands while I'm working on this.
Not comfortable.
Not comfortable at all. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember similar timeout things when I had an application that did DNS lookups.
Yep.
Unfortunately, whoever was hitting the web pages, their IP address would not resolve.
Right.
And so my Apache workers were hanging for 2 minutes, and I was running out of Apache workers, and every site on the system was down.
Yep. Yeah, I've seen similar stuff to that as well, and you definitely got to make sure you disable DNS resolution. The other one is it can also play havoc with SSH. So when a server was, one I had was being, I think, denial of service attacked or whatever, and it was DNS would be flooded out, and so I had to tune SSH to not time out. So when you first connect, SSH only gives you so much time to log in before it kicks you out. But if the DNS timeout is longer than that, then if it can't resolve your IP, you never get the chance to type in your password.
Oh, so in your SSD, your
SSHD config, I disabled DNS.
No.
Yes, and use DNS as no. But the other thing I had done is up the login grace time to like 10 minutes.
Yeah.
But the problem is that makes those bot attacks on your SSH worse too. So it's like trying to get the right trade-off there.
Yeah.
It's like,
were you allowed to run it on non-port 22?
in this case, well, we could have. The problem is we were selling shell accounts.
Oh,
so people were going to connect to this, and so we really needed it to be the default. And also there's like 100 customers paying to be able to log into the system, and they're all coming from random places. Some of them are from Europe and stuff, and when they try to connect and it lags and times out, they're like, oh, you're a crappy provider. It's like, actually, no, it's just your reverse DNS doesn't work.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of that.
Yeah. Any mail administrator knows the woes of reverse DNS.
Yes. And then, at Scale Engine, we rent a lot of servers, and some of them we get to control the reverse DNS, and some of them we don't. And some of them it's like, well, you can email us and ask us, and we'll update it, but we haven't yet. So your server shows up as like the dorsetmarket.co.uk. It's like, that's not us. It's just
yeah. Can you keep it just 123.network.net?
Exactly. Or the other place where you're like, well, looking at what this reverse DNS resolves to, this was definitely used by a spammer in the past. Oh. That's great. All kinds of stuff like that.
Hey, guess who I see?
Yes.
Hey. All right, get over here, Wes.
There we go. Now we got Wes on the show. Our special one-time co-host
boom
of TechSNAP.
You know
Wes.
Hello.
Hello, welcome to the show.
As ever?
Oh, well, thank you, sir. Nice to see you. How's your fest going?
Oh, I've yesterday I talked so much my jaw was sore.
I think that's a great sign of a successful Linux Fest, right?
It is.
Yeah, and I didn't even get all fucked up and hung over, last night because I was at no parties. I was with the kids.
You were playing it responsible.
Yeah,
Setting an example for the rest of us.
I was the parent. Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Well, one of the parents, luckily.
Yeah. So Wes, we were talking about that TSX story that we had on Telegram earlier.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. And I'm just reading more of the story here in the it was their central storage server that went down, and their remediation efforts started Friday afternoon, and the defective device was replaced and tested. So this really suggests that so they had a device, it failed, and they've now replaced it. Doesn't explain where's the backup.
Yeah, where's the backup?
Yeah. I'm sure they have tape backups, but where's the secondary device?
Right, yeah, exactly. For a service you expect to be running, 24/7.
It's only the stock exchange. It's not like it's important to the economy or anything.
Not at all.
And it was a TMX group, so apparently they have shared infrastructure between the Toronto Stock Exchange, the Montreal Stock Exchange, the Toronto Venture Exchange, and a bunch of these other exchanges. It's like...
So there's not even a lack of resources or anything else as an excuse.
How about some sharding or something? How about each of these has a separate storage backend, just so that, one of them doesn't go out?
We don't take down the whole thing.
Exactly. And if they had separate shards, then we're like, let's just, you can even set it up so that any one of them fails and it can fail over to, Toronto's storage backend has gone down, switch to they can share the Montreal one, right? They don't have to have two for every one of these exchanges.
Right.
They just need,
some level of redundancy.
N+1 or N+2 maybe, because it's only the stock exchange.
Right.
Yeah, they have no money.
Yes.
It seems like a pretty simple, operational expense as well. You just, it's another line item to the things that you need to run your business.
Yeah.
I don't get it.
Yeah. I'd love to know more about what they're actually using as the back end.
Yeah, the technical details.
Yeah, like... We kind of postulated maybe like a NetApp or an EMC, some kind
big
of
storage appliance.
thing.
I have a good feeling that maybe someone from Red Hat got on the phone offering help.
Possibly. But, if it was like an EMC, that's Dell now, or NetApp is, a giant company of itself.
Yeah, absolutely true.
And they have a great quote here. TMX is committed to applying the lessons learned from this incident to help us prevent such issues from recurring in the future.
Okay, commitment.
Says the CEO who, laid off half the tech staff a couple months ago.
Oh, is that right? I missed that part.
Yeah, I saw it in the related news when this first came up. It's like, oh yeah, look, there's the same CEO saying, oh yeah, we're much more agile now because we got rid of half the people we don't need.
That's the secret of agile. You just fire everyone and agility happens.
Yeah. So
we're lean now, guys. We're lean.
It definitely seems like it maybe wasn't the power like we thought it was. So we were talking. Jeff talked to us a bit about batteries and how that works,
nice.
and we talked about UPSs and some fun horror stories there.
Ooh.
But of course, being being in the current political climate we're in now, they've I think 8 different times in this news story are a hack is not to blame, and there was no cybersecurity incident. It was just hardware failure. It's like
nothing's compromised. No data was lost.
Yes. I love when we see that a denial of service attack happens. Nobody got into our private data. It's that's a denial of service attack is push you off the internet, not. It's if a denial of service attack resulted in a data breach, then you're doing
everything wrong. Yeah.
But at the same time, I can definitely see a data breach followed by a denial of service attack to draw attention away from it and maybe give it some more time. But
part of a bigger, more coordinated effort or something.
Right, but in the end, the exfiltration needs the internet to work, so you're not going to combine those two too close together.
For sure. It's funny though, I guess perhaps the public is now trained, right? Anytime they see any sort of IT issue, they're now worried about some sort of breach.
Yes.
Which I suppose is better than it was before, where no one cared at all about it.
But at the same time, we're getting the fatigue now where, they're like, oh, I don't need to go change all my passwords because I've just given up on doing that.
Everyone has all my information already.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. We'll never win. That's the problem.
Yep.
Maybe some tech at the stock exchange decided he would rack a new computer and didn't understand its power requirements. So
maybe, but it sounds like it was it was definitely the they had faulty hardware they replaced. So it definitely seems like it was something with their storage appliance. Although I wonder what it would be. They'd have to replace like the chassis or something.
Yeah, that's a pretty major fault.
Failed disks is one thing, and a failed power supply is another thing. But they said they had to replace the failed device. But you know,
sounds spendy too.
Yeah, but.
I wonder if they couldn't actually do it because they had a service contract and it requires like an on-site, like a vendor.
So they're just then limited by that response timeline.
Yeah, well,
I could see that. You're right.
Maybe they'll renegotiate that now because, you know,
we need faster service.
Yeah, the stock exchange can't go down at 1:30 on Friday and not open again until Monday.
Yeah, right. It seems like there's so much money involved there anyway.
Or
just
in particular,
the top,
what do you mean a 4-hour response time is appropriate?
In this case, it makes you wonder a bit if, if this had happened on a Tuesday instead of a Friday, would they have been able to get it up by the next morning?
Right.
Like they got lucky here that they had the weekend to try to get things back online before, everything went to hell.
It's funny, we don't talk that much about the technology behind all these stock exchanges and the massive amounts of data they're transferring at lightning speeds, but it sure is fascinating.
Yeah.
iXsystems.com/TechSNAP. That's where you go to learn more about iXsystems, a company that could build solutions driven by open source. I've been talking more and more about different use cases and workloads you can use iX hardware for, and of course it's endless. They'll custom build a solution for you with their white glove approach. But let's talk about backup for a moment. That's something that's on our mind, and iXsystems has solutions that help protect your data as it grows. And we all know that your data needs get more and more demanding, and iXsystems can help you build a system that will scale to your growth but not break the pocketbook. You can protect your enterprise storage environment and save time and money with a TrueNAS unified storage array with built-in data security from OpenZFS. The TrueNAS unified storage array has industry-standard built-in data encryption that's compliant with HIPAA, PCI, and of course, now the GDPR. The enterprise version of FreeNAS, it's TrueNAS, the world's #1 software-defined storage operating system. You can achieve better backup integrity through its built-in self-healing bit rot mitigation, with unlimited instant snapshots, replication, and encryption. And of course, whenever you need it, their award-winning white glove US-based support. iXsystems.com/TechSNAP. Support the show and grab a white paper to learn more about iX and maybe even grease the wheels up the chain in your business. iXsystems.com/TechSNAP. And TechSNAP is also made possible by do.co/snap. DigitalOcean infrastructure when you need it as fast as you can possibly imagine with data centers all over the world. Everything is SSD based, and when you go to do.co/snap, you will get a $100 credit. Once you apply that with a new account, you get 60 days to try DigitalOcean. Simple and scalable. You can deploy a system that's custom-built, mix and match resources as you need it, or deploy my favorite system with 4 gigabytes of RAM, 2 CPUs, 80 gigabytes of built-in SSD, and 3 terabytes of transfer. It's just 3 cents an hour. And when you go to do.co/snap, you get that $100 credit. You can make a lot of machines. You can even try something out, maybe test out a new project idea that you've had and put something in production. They have monitoring and alerting so you can keep an eye on things, DNS management that's super easy and integrated, and of course data centers all over the world with 40 gigabit connections coming into the hypervisors themselves. And their cloud firewalls take care of all of the traffic you don't want at the network edge instead of letting it hit your device. Plus they have tons of great documentation to help you take advantage of DigitalOcean. Just a couple of days ago, they posted a brand new OpenVPN setup guide for getting it going on the latest version of Ubuntu. You can find so much good documentation on DigitalOcean's site. You can deploy an entire application stack like GitLab, the entire stack, with one click, or you can build it yourself and follow their guides if you ever need help. Just start by going to do.co/snap. Also, thank you to Ting, techsnap.ting.com. That's where you go to take $25 off a device or get $25 in service credit for something that's smarter than unlimited. It's Ting. When you use less, you pay less. The average Ting bill is $23 per phone per month. It's so simple and easy, I can explain it in just seconds. It's $6 a month for your line, and then your usage, your minutes, your messages, and your megabytes. Whatever you use, that's what you pay. techsnap.ting.com. Nationwide coverage, which I have been testing very extensively on this road trip, and that's how I'm talking to you guys right now. They have no contracts, no early termination fees. You just pay for what you use. You can use their control panel to make sure everything's copacetic and exactly what you expect, disable individual services, and I'm going to recommend a phone for you. the Moto G6. Ting actually has a review up on their blog right now. When you go to techsnap.ting.com, you can buy this high-end unlocked Android device for $224 because you get that $25 discount. It's a great value phone with a 3,000 milliamp battery, turbocharge, great screen, and it supports Moto mods. They have a full review up on their blog. I love the Ting approach. You can bring your own device or grab one from them. They don't get in the way. They have no experience agenda that they want to push down to your device. They just let you use your phone however you want, and you just pay for what you use. TechSNAP.ting.com.
So have you guys ever accidentally shut off a rack by plugging too much into it?
No.
No, I've done other bad things to it, but not plugging too much into it.
Not too long ago, our sysadmin, while racking something, accidentally knocked the power cable out of the switch, which is the same as unplugging all the machines, basically. Because in particular, the rack in this data center has a 10 gigabit feed that's actually a point-to-point link to another data center like 2 kilometers away, which is much more expensive real estate inside. So we have a one-use switch there, and that's it. It's just where we cross-connect to all the other providers.
That makes sense.
And then we have a 10 gig DWDM wavelength to this other data center where space is a lot cheaper.
Yeah.
And that's where all of our stuff is. And yeah, if the switch that's plugged in goes down, then this whole rack is now isolated from the internet.
Yes, you just have nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was racking a new server many years ago, and I thought just because I had a place to plug it in, I had the power.
This will work just great.
Yeah, and then when all the disks started spinning at once, there was no power for anything suddenly.
Yep. Yeah. You see, actually, a lot of machines now actually have like the option of staggered spin up for the hard drives.
Yeah, that's
cool.
Yeah, because like I have machines with 36 hard drives in one 4U chassis. And if all of those start trying to torque at once, that can be quite a power spike.
Yeah, totally.
Or like my APC PDUs actually have the option that if power's lost and comes back, start this machine and this machine, and then after 30 seconds, start these machines, and then after a minute, start these machines. It's like, I need the switch to come up first, but that machine can come up 5 minutes later after everybody else has already done their startup surges.
I think that's the next piece I really want my home lab to have is a nice
staggered
managed
startup.
PDU with those features.
Yep.
Yeah.
The one I have at home was pretty good. I have another one where it lost its mind and just says error and won't talk to the network anymore, and so you can't manage it.
It still provides power.
Yes.
Okay,
but
so
I've heard stories of ones where there was some component failed and the power would like fade until one of the ports would flip off. Like the relay would trip, and then that would bring the power back up enough that it would keep going, and then it would fade some more, and it just like randomly turning off your equipment when you're not expecting
terrifying.
it.
Yeah.
Oh my
and
God.
so
How long did it take to figure that out?
a while, but that friend will not buy individually switched power units anymore.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, there's always a cost to the complexity of things, and most of the time it works well, but maybe a higher
that's
failure
a good
rate.
argument for having double power supplies per server.
Yeah. But you probably have 2 PDUs you bought at the same time.
Yeah.
So what's the
True.
chance they're both going to start doing that to you?
Well, each power supply goes into a different PDU. So.
Yeah. But if the 2 PDUs are the same, maybe they're going to have the same problem. Hopefully not the same parts at the same time and you keep stuff alive. But that's also how you can end up tripping breakers.
Yeah, that's true.
One too many things goes down on this side, everybody
Jumps over there.
rushes over to the other side, and then
and
that
then
flips
no
through.
one has power.
Yep.
There are really a lot of those factors, to actually be resilient if you're trying to think about this long term and do it right.
Yeah, and at our main data center, the second PDU or the second power drop we have is not as much power. So like the first one is 20 amps at 240 volts, and the other one is only 10.
Oh, okay.
Because power is expensive.
Right. Yeah. And most of the time you don't need it.
Yeah, and a bunch of the machines don't have dual power supplies because they're really cheap.
Yep, sure.
We made really compact machines. Although it's funny, some of our switches we've now decided are important enough. They need dual power.
Yep.
But the switches generally don't have 2 power supplies. But they'll have this little connector, sometimes a weird one, sometimes a normal one. So like the Ubiquities have a little barrel connector, and you get like an external adapter and plug it into the other
I've
power
seen
supply.
Those. Yep.
but the Netgears or whatever, a bunch of them have like a weird connector for like a proprietary
Of course, yes.
redundant power supply module that costs like half as much as a switch.
Yep.
Not that the component is expensive, but just you only need this if you care about your switch. So
We
can
know that
charge
you'll
you
pay
lots.
money for this.
Exactly.
Oh, wow. I just learned what the screw on the back of the switch does.
What's that do?
That's for lightning protection.
Yes, grounding
Oh.
screw.
Yeah.
Very important.
Yep.
And rarely connected.
Yes. Well, that reminds me of when lightning hit my house. So it came in over the cable line rather than the power.
Oh, really?
Because everything in my house, all the computer components go through like a UPS,
Sure.
and it's all lightning protected. But it came in through the cable line, went through the modem without breaking it, the cable modem, but then zapped the switch the cable modem was plugged into, and every machine that happened to be trying to receive the packet at that precise second. So like a third of the machines in my house, the onboard NICs are fried.
Just fried.
Oh,
wow.
Yeah. And the switch never powered on again.
I bet not, right? Ooh.
So I had to replace the switch and buy like a bunch of like PCIe 1X
Just regular
network
NICs,
cards
yeah.
and plug them into a bunch of my computers and get all this. And so I bought this surge protector for Ethernet, but luckily then later replaced my internet connection with fiber.
Beautiful. Hey, there you go.
Excellent.
But I remember when people used to use dial-up, especially in the small town where I lived, where that was the only option for a long time. The modems getting fried by lightning and surges coming over the telephone lines like
Yes.
all the time. To the point where one guy actually bought a pair of media converters on eBay, so that you get your copper connection coming in, convert it to copper or to fiber,
Yep.
run like a foot,
Just a
and
tiny
then
bit.
back to copper, so that lightning couldn't pass that
You
point.
got an air gap right there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Or
that's
a light
also
gap, I guess.
Light gap, yeah.
that's also important if you don't have a common ground between the
Yep.
two places.
Yeah, ooh,
because
good point, yeah.
You don't want to have a current ground loop going between two switches because
Yep.
that can fry them.
Yeah, totally.
And I can imagine all kinds of extra complexity if you start putting wireless stuff on the top of metal towers.
Oh yeah, yeah. It would make a lot of sense to just have a fiber transceiver right next to it, so that you don't
You
have any
isolate it.
static or something like that. You know, high wind can create static and all kinds of stuff. You know, if you have water damage near a connector, you don't want it traveling the distance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fiber really runs the world these days.
Yep.
Yeah,
But it's
and-
so fragile.
It's so fragile, and I feel like, and the most like actual consumers, maybe they see it if they have a really nice internet connection, but pretty much not. These days a lot of the fiber connections too are like big condos where then it's just becomes switched to Ethernet to your
Yep.
condo or something.
And like in our rack, even we mostly use the DACs, the direct copper connections, because buying two optical modules and this fragile cable to run between them, or we can buy this cable that's got the modules built into it, and this is as far as we need to go, and you don't have to worry about like bend radius and stuff.
Right, yeah, exactly.
We had that problem when my business partner installed the one connection. The fiber connector's there, and then it immediately does like a 180, and it's like, no, you cannot bend it that far at once.
Will not work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, or will work, and then suddenly won't work. And that's that connection I talked about that goes from the one data center to the other. So it terminates at the top of the rack when it comes in the building, and then it needs to go to our switch. But no, you can't just do a 180 like that. Like they make special plastic things that are the maximum bend radius so that you can
just get
control it
That makes sense.
and stuff. And
That's good. And we saw Comcast stop by our church and install a new line, and they were particularly concerned about bend radius in their install.
Yep.
And this is just coax, so they're concerned about,
Well, yeah,
about
'cause,
cracking the
in
dielectric.
coax,
and-
you have it's kind of a thin piece of copper and then all this shielding and stuff. And if you bend it too much, it'll just kink and break, and then you won't have a connection, or you'll get a really noisy connection.
Yeah, and so that's going to reduce your bit rate.
Yeah.
But yeah, that weave that goes on the outside, that can stretch open and let RF through.
Yep.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that would make sense.
You also have a similar kind of thing on Wi-Fi radios. We call them pigtails. You hook them up to the antenna, and you can get them in up to like 500 millimeters in length or so. But yeah, there's no circumstance where you want to kink it back on itself, because that's going to break the jacket. It might not break it immediately.
But the stress over time,
But,
right?
you put it inside a chassis, it gets up to, say, 90 degrees centigrade occasionally. If it's ever in the sun, it oxidizes, like all these things.
Yeah, totally.
Yep.
The daily grind of everyday service.
Yeah.
And we have such expectations these days, I want my uptime to be as many 9s as you'll give me.
Yeah, and it's, I want the wireless to work when there's how many people in here all polluting the wireless
Yes.
with their, especially now phones and so on are like constantly doing even just little bits of chatter.
Yep, all the time, yeah.
Checking for notifications.
I gotta get
or-
my pushes, Alan. I gotta get my pushes.
Constantly.
Well, it's and then worse is when you have devices that are polling, right? They're constantly calling the website. Is there anything new? Is there anything
got
new?
anything for me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then times, there's like 800 people here, whatever. It's like, wow. If you just visualize the radio coming off everybody, it would
That
just
would be a
like,
really neat visualization to see.
yeah. It'd just be like, wow. No wonder the wireless isn't working so well.
Would just bathe
like-
in a warm RF glow.
Yeah, it's like
Kind of. Yeah.
putting
we're-
a bunch of more APs in the room is not going to help this at all.
Yeah. Well, having your frequencies separate,
Yep.
that's important.
Yeah, it's exactly the problem we have at our hotel is you get those people that know just enough to be dangerous. So they've
Exactly.
scattered the APs across channels 1, 6, and 11, but they didn't actually make sure to arrange them so they're like not overlapping. And so, like,
1 and 6 are in adjacent rooms.
no, in this case, is actually the 3 closest APs are all on channel 6,
Yeah.
defeating
This
the
is the
entire
sixth
purpose.
corner over here.
That's only good if you want to do same channel roaming.
Yeah,
And
right.
a hotel there, you're not going to really roam well.
Yeah, I'm in my room. I just want to associate with one.
Yeah, different than an
society
office
and
building
sit here.
or convention space.
Yeah, in the convention space maybe, but you're slightly lucky here in that you can. There's not walls separating things too bad. Like on the floor here, you have almost line of sight to the ceiling kind of thing.
Yeah.
And there's not anything giant concrete walls between things. So 5 gigahertz works very nice in here, whereas other places is like not so much.
Yeah, this exhibit hall has had a number of Wi-Fi systems, and
Looks like there's a Unify up there now.
well, last year one of the things that they had on display was their Meraki screen right at the back of the BTC.
Oh,
so,
yeah.
whatever Meraki is compatible with, and that's not necessarily all Cisco products either.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, because Meraki and Cisco, they're different divisions, but one of them, as Greg Farrow would say, are the cool kids.
Are the cool kids.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, it reminds me, a couple other companies that got acquired by Cisco, like the SourceFire guys that do Snort and SlamAV.
Right.
Yeah, that's an all FreeBSD shop, and so
I
that's
did
the
not
cool
realize
kids
that.
inside.
Okay.
Cool kids inside Cisco.
Wow.
It's where Dan works.
That makes perfect sense. I just hadn't realized. I know he was using FreeBSD, but
Yeah.
he didn't let on that it was all FreeBSD.
Yeah, all the infrastructure that they use for doing the security research at what's Cisco's threat division called?
Yeah. Oh man, I should know this because we talk about it all the time.
I forget too.
Yeah. See, this is why we need Dan here. Come on, Dan. You're letting us down.
Yeah, just everyone watch Telegram.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Will you get to see Dan sometime soon at a upcoming conference?
In June, he's hosting BSDCan.
Oh, right,
so,
perfect, yes.
We'll be there for 5 days or so.
Excellent.
Or I guess I'll be there a little bit for that. And I think he's running the Postgres SQL conference at the same venue. I think it's the week before.
Oh, wow.
So he'll be coming up to Canada for a while pretty soon.
Oh, that'll be wonderful.
It's where he's originally from, but
Yeah.
he mostly lives in Pennsylvania now.
Yeah.
But
Which has been your most interesting booth on the floor?
Oh, that's a good question. I will say Jupiter Broadcasting's got some pretty sweet stickers this year, so,
Uh-huh. I've had some particularly good conversations with the Silicon Mechanics guys.
they have a Xeon Phi based, so not the offload card, but the actual one where the CPU is a Xeon Phi. So it's like
yeah.
256 cores.
That's beautiful.
It's trippy. It's not as big as you think it is. It should
Yeah.
be with that
It's
many
like
cores.
you fit 200, or I guess it's 64 Pentium 3 or Pentium 4 cores in there, and then hyper-threading such that each one is 4 threads.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's the
Yep.
multiplier there. It's amazing.
Woo-wee.
And they tried it, and it boots TrueOS
Does it?
on top of Linux.
That, Like
Well,
virtualized or?
No, that as the native processor.
Oh, as the
Because
native-
it's actually like 64 Pentium 4s, basically.
Yeah. Wow.
Because it's interesting. I was just reading like 2 weeks ago or something. We covered it on BSD Now. The Knights Crossing, the PCI card version of this, had some video shaders and an actual video output port, and you could use it as a video card. Although it's mostly designed to be for like GPU type workloads. Sure. But using regular x86 instructions instead of having to, write special NVIDIA or OpenCL on instructions. And Intel actually made it emulate DirectX by running FreeBSD on the card and having a DirectX program that ran as a 256 threaded program and did the DirectX calculations in CPU.
In CPU.
Yeah.
And it worked?
Turns out, yeah.
That's wild.
That's impressive.
Yeah.
That is,
I was like, wow.
What do you do with an extra 128 cores?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
I don't
all
have
kinds of
anything to
weird.
do with those right now.
Yeah.
Like, I can't run that many VMs.
Yeah, give me something really parallelizable.
Yeah.
Yeah. Something more than just MPEG encoding.
Yeah.
But I remember back in the day, like when hyperthreading first came out, and AMD was talking about reverse hyperthreading, making 2 cores look like one really fast core. It's like,
Interesting.
that'd be cool nowadays. Although I think it turns out it doesn't really work for caching reasons, and the
That
instructions
does seem
aren't as
difficult.
splittable and so on. But
caching.
a lot of this, the Xeon Phi and Knights Landing and Knights Crossing and so on, end up really being canceled in the end. But what's interesting is the AVX 512 instructions that we've seen added to the newer Intel CPUs is actually basically the Phi instruction set.
But ported over.
Yeah, or brought forward. And so all that research and so on actually did turn into something useful, and we get these highly parallelizable workloads if you have vector instructions. So
Right.
we've seen like SHA hashing and a bunch of, and like RAID calculation stuff where you can like do 16 of the calculations concurrently.
Yes.
And basically kind of giving us something useful coming out of that project, even though it ended up being canceled.
Oh, that's a good success story. I feel like that happens more often than we realize,
Yeah.
Little pieces of things you can take and slot them into other projects. You just don't get the fanfare of like, here's this big announcement. We released this product.
Yeah, about 20 years ago, when I was, a computer engineering student, there was like one machine that could do those kind of SIMD things.
Yes.
Yep. All kinds of crazy stuff.
Yeah. Now it's just like, hey, that's the next machine I'm gonna buy.
Yeah.
I don't know quite what I'm gonna do with it, but damn, it's gonna run solitaire
Yeah,
fast.
right? As many games as you can possibly play at once.
Yep. Well, yeah, it's like, remember when 3DFX first came out, I think with the Voodoo 2, we could have 2 of them pinned together, like one would do one thing and one would do the other thing, whatever. It's like nobody imagined people would be building machines with like 4 graphics cards in them and
No
doing
kidding,
silly
yeah.
stuff. Or
Or those 3U Supermicro chassis that can
with
hold
like
7
8 machines. 7 or 8
Yeah.
machines.
Yeah, but like the power requirements, but that's like 2,000 watt power
Yep.
supply
You were
requirement.
churning through some,
Yep.
Yeah.
making
Yeah,
some
it's
entropy
like,
up in there.
Not only are those like 13,000 RPM fans going to be screaming at you, but it's going to like hit you with a blast of 100-degree air as you walk behind it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the GPUs really they've invaded the data center.
Yeah.
I mean, they were already there somewhat, but now they're everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting that we the custom appliance that we have iX build for my company is 1U, and it has a special proprietary motherboard that's narrower, and it has a PCIe riser mounted on the edge of the motherboard, so you can actually fit 2 full height cards in a 1U chassis.
Nice.
Normally, you can only get one because the motherboard is underneath the card when you turn it sideways, but this is special narrow motherboard,
So it's off to
that
the side and you can just
so
slot it
that
in.
you're down right to bare metal case under it, and you can actually fit either a single dual height video card in it, or in our case up to 2 of these single slot video cards. And actually the riser has a half height slot going the other way, so there is one that overhangs the motherboard, so we can get like a 10 gigabit NIC in there as well.
That is slick.
Although the newer design, the 2 built-in Ethernet ports on the motherboard are actually 10 gigs, so we don't actually
you don't
need
have to worry about that.
Yeah, we don't have to buy the extra card to get the 10 gigabits.
Have you guys ever bonded 10 gig ports? Ever played around with that?
I don't think I have.
No. When I needed to do the testing, I was doing some performance testing on SSH for doing ZFS replication over SSH.
Oh, yeah.
And seeing what I could do to get the best speed. I cheated and used the machine at the FreeBSD network test cluster that had a dual port 40 gigabit card instead of trying to bond two of my 10 gigabit NICs together.
Yeah.
I think the best I got was, 18 gigabits a second of ZFS replication before SSH topped out at the most it could do.
Yeah. Hey, that's pretty good, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
I think Netcat got up to 31 gigabits.
Nice.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, at about that speed, you're challenging your PCIe backplane. You know, you're getting up to some theoretical
you're pushing
limits
that's a lot of data to go.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, even at 40 gigabits, we're talking about, you don't have very many nanoseconds to process each of those packets.
No.
Yeah.
And so especially when we're looking at performance improvements on FreeBSD as a router, where you have to take that packet, at 10 gigabit, you have to take that packet in, do some work, and put it back out of the other NIC. And you have, I think it's 14 nanoseconds to do it.
Make your routing decision real quick now.
Yeah. And that's why, being able to do 10 gigabits out of the card is not hard if you're doing the full 1,500 byte packets, or if you're doing jumbo frames and doing 9,000 byte packets.
Yeah, totally.
But we test worst case scenario of the 64 byte packet. The minute it's all header and one
Just
byte
one
of
tiny,
data.
yes, right.
And that means
that's
to
a
get to 10 gigabits, you have to be able to do 14.8 million packets per second.
Ooh.
You have to receive that, decide how to route it, and send it
push
out.
it out.
And for a while there, the best we could do was about 10, but it really depended on the NIC and stuff. And now we're solidly doing all 14 million packets a second. It's okay, now it's time to switch to 40 gigabit NICs and see where the bottlenecks are.
Yeah. So is that mostly just a process then of finding each bottleneck, knocking them down, and continuing through the stack?
And then being we knocked that bottleneck down, but it turns out there was a second one that's the same size and we got no improvement. Or you finally knock one down and you get a big improvement. It's oh, nice. And then, it's on to the next thing. And next thing, and next thing.
Okay, well now what's slowing us down?
And then, as he's doing that, he's also testing the firewalls. So how much slower does a firewall get? It's why does this one firewall seem a lot faster than the other one when
I was going to say,
to scale better?
Both.
Depending on the type of firewall, the more rules you have might actually make it slower.
Right.
And it looked really weird because at first it looked like, all right, as we add more rules, this firewall is getting slower and slower, and this one's staying the same speed. How's it doing that? And you're looking at it as, actually, when you give it this list of rules, it recompiles that into a table where it can just do a lookup. So it doesn't have to check the packet against every rule. It just checks one rule that has this table of matches. And it's cheaters. So they rewrote the test rule set to use a table and trying the size of the table. And now that both firewalls can
perform the same.
And you really get into. It turns out benchmarking is really difficult.
It's a whole own process, right? With its own...
Because it's the biggest mistake Phoronix always makes is when you get a result, the first thing you have to do is ask why. And then basically why 5 more times. And eventually then it's okay, so if this test wasn't actually testing what I thought it was testing.
Yes.
I was testing number of rules versus size of table, which isn't the same thing. And once I made it, apples to apples, I got
turns out I got results
the
that
same,
are very different.
no difference or the opposite of what I expected.
Yeah, it seems like you really need to have understanding, right? You can't, a large part, just black box tests, they don't really mean much, right? Maybe your vendor has this, but it's how does that actually fit into the whole stack? Where are my real limitations?
Yeah, and it's the same that when you get the vendor benchmarks, it's this drive can do this many IOPS. It's yeah, if you do all linear and you do it exactly this way,
turns out none of my things are like that.
Samsung is apparently notorious for writing their drive benchmarks that way. You have to get the full 64 queue depth on their drives to get that amount of throughput.
Or back in the day, ATI and NVIDIA both got caught cheating on standard graphics benchmarks, 3D Mark and so on.
Right.
They optimize for that specific test to get a slightly higher score than the competitor. It's sure, it gives you a better score, but when you play the game, you get completely different results.
So there are lies, damn lies, and benchmarks.
Exactly.
It really is a statistics game.
Yeah.
That's one of the other nice things is on FreeBSD, there's actually a statistics tool built in that one of the FreeBSD developers wrote called Ministat.
Is
and
that
you
right?
give it like, you run each benchmark before and after or whatever 5 or more times, and you feed it the numbers from both, and it does the stats and figures out, all right, with 95% confidence, there's a 2% difference in these numbers.
Beautiful.
Or you've actually, while the numbers, the average and the median are pretty much are different, it turns out that there's actually not much difference here when you look at it statistically.
Yeah, you actually look at the spread of the distribution and...
Yeah, and then it tries to draw a little ASCII art diagram, and it's like, okay, that part maybe is not so useful.
A little over-engineered.
But it can help you understand also, like... So I ran the benchmark 10 times, and I got this average, but what I actually got is half the results were at this time and half the results were at this time. The average in the middle, I never actually got a result anywhere near there.
Yep.
And then the median, it's like, well, if I got 5 and 5, the median's going to be like one or the other kind of thing. It's not going to necessarily be the right answer either. And actually, from the graph, you can tell, all right, what I actually have here is bimodal.
Totally.
So why is half the time it doing faster than this half? Is it a cache effect? Is it NUMA? It turns out if you have a dual socket system, if you're benchmarking certain things, if you're trying to talk to the PCIe card that's connected to CPU 1, but you're running on CPU 0, you go across the cross connect and it takes a little longer and your performance will be worse. So then you're using like the CPU set command and trying to pin the CPU affinity of your benchmark to be close to
what you're accessing.
To the memory or the NIC that you're accessing or whatever. And then suddenly that makes a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or even just when I was doing the SSH testing over a pipe, making sure that both sides were on the same CPU, and I wasn't copying memory back and forth.
That's huge.
That's difficult to track down. You have to learn what PCI lanes are associated with what socket, what core.
Yep.
And the abstraction really starts breaking down, right? You really have to understand the actual implementation of whatever machine you're using then.
Yeah, and not sometimes you can pick the wrong cores, and sometimes like not pinning is more efficient.
Yep. And sometimes it's also like tweaking the scheduler. Like, do I want to steal more often? The work's been on this core, but that core's got a bit of other work going on. Do I steal it and bring it over here? But in doing so, I don't get to bring the cache with me. And that cache was hot and maybe it would do better staying over there. But at the same time, if it's contending with some other process, maybe that process is going to keep blowing out its cache and giving me worse results than if I brought it over here.
That's a lot of things to consider, right? And try to get right.
Your results on a server might be different than what you want on a desktop.
Absolutely.
Or a laptop. On a laptop, it's like, if the core is not all the way busy, keep all the tasks on one core so the other one is just in a low power state.
Turn it off.
And I get more battery life. And then, the same thing with like Turbo Boost. Sometimes it's faster to crank the clock up and get all this work done in half a second rather than to spend 3 seconds doing it at a lower clock rate. Because while that used more battery, it only did it for a short amount of time, and then I got back to a low power state instead of being in a medium state for 3 seconds. So power management and scheduling and having a scheduler that understands power management is really complicated, and you end up with this thing of, you have your laptop and your desktop and then a server and then a busy server, and they all actually need slightly different tuning.
Absolutely. Yeah, right, totally.
Yeah, neat stuff. Yeah. So going back to firewalls, so the successor to IP tables is NF tables, right? Okay. So there's a successor to that now too.
I was reading a little bit about that.
Yeah, is that EBF tables?
eBPF is
eBPF?
eBPF is the tracing framework. I think this is just a BPF based firewall thing.
Right.
So do you know what BPF stands for?
A Berkeley packet filter.
Yes. Boom. So you're like, oh look, if we compile the firewall rules down to a BPF, we can match them fast like TCP dump does.
Yeah.
Do you know what firewall's been doing that for 20 years?
Oh, yeah.
IPFW on BSD.
Totally.
It turns out there's a fast way to do a firewall.
Yeah.
It's because, oh look, this machine language is specifically designed to match packets.
Exactly.
It's really good at matching packets.
Yeah, totally.
Well, writing rules can be difficult.
Yep.
Like just the syntax between TCP dump and Wireshark.
Yep.
That they don't use the same syntax, and I find it continually confusing.
Yeah, right.
I'll jump from one to the other, and I just
context
have to go,
switching. And
I have to go back to the web page and look up more examples because I can't remember them all.
Yeah, back in school for our firewall class, we learned 3 firewalls: IP tables, IPF, which is the predecessor to PF on FreeBSD and OpenBSD, and Cisco PIC. Although was it PIC? Something. The Cisco we had was literally like a 486 based appliance.
Oh, wow.
Like we had the old one.
Okay,
like before they made it a dedicated, it was like a regular 486 with some firewall cards in it or something.
Wow.
It was
but
weird.
the Cisco PIC, that's
Yep.
been dead for a decade.
Oh, yeah.
Or should have been.
Yes. So it was pretty much dead when we were learning it. But it was, the syntax is pretty similar to what you would get on a newer Cisco, like an ASA or whatever.
Sure.
Even ASAs are out of fashion, aren't
true.
they?
In particular, we had one client who was doing some streaming video. It was TV Ontario had this system called Homework Help, where after school they would pay some teachers to be available via like a internet chat thing to help you with your math homework. And every student in like grade 7 through 10 got it for free.
Wow.
If they were enrolled in a public school. But they would have a streaming video part too, and they were pushing up to like 600 megabits out of the network. And their Cisco ASA couldn't handle that.
Couldn't keep up with that.
Yeah, so we replaced that with we turned their dev server into a PFSense, and look,
and then
now
we
we
go.
can push a gigabit with no problem.
No problem.
All right, yeah. I love seeing ZFS send go like 998 on my network.
Yep.
Yeah, right.
Well, like I said, I had it going like 18 gigabits a second. Like,
I just have gigabit at home.
yes.
That's reasonable.
But even better, now that ZFS on FreeBSD and Linux has the compressed send, so you're not decompressing the data, sending it over the network, and then recompressing it.
Recompressing it.
When did what version did that show up in? Was that a 7.6
in
something?
FreeBSD, we don't have the same version, so
it's
it just
not
showed up
open.
as a feature one day.
Okay.
It's been around long enough. I don't think it's in FreeBSD 11.1, but it'll be in 11.2 that comes out later this next month, or June. But because without that, what you ended up doing usually was ZFS send, pipe, gzip or xzip or
PXE
or whatever, pipe SSH, pipe unxed, pipe ZFS receive.
Just so you could have it compressed over the wire. And then,
because, especially if you had highly compressible stuff, like a 45 gigabyte database that could compress down to like 10 gigs.
Yes, totally.
Compressing it. But then you could also run into the problem of, with xzip or gzip, even on the lowest compression setting, can still take a lot of time, and you end up not keeping the network 100% saturated, and it's like, this could be going faster if it wasn't wasting CPU.
Why am I burning
trying
all
to
this?
compress stuff that's no good? So actually, Z Standard, the compression algorithm out of Facebook, the command line tool has a user-contributed patch for adaptive mode. Because Z Standard actually has 19 levels of compression, and they've actually extended that to have more levels now, or negative levels that are even faster but provide less compression than the minimum.
Yeah, I see.
The old minimum. With the adaptive mode, you put it then like between ZFS send and your ZFS receive, and it adjusts the compression level based on how much data is waiting to go over the network. So it keeps the network busy and a pile of packets ready to go to the network. And as soon as there's packets are piling up waiting for the network, so the network's the bottleneck, it turns the compression up because you might as well spend some CPU time and make less data and send it over the network faster. But if the network buffer drains and now the network isn't going as fast as it could be, turn the compression level down, and so that we're not sitting there burning up CPU trying to compress stuff that's not going to compress, or to keep the network busy, but at the same time don't send any more data than we have to.
That is super fancy. I love that.
Yeah. And so
we've been waiting for that forever.
Right?
It's like, how did nobody think of this sooner? Like, even just for gzip or something.
Yeah, it's one of those things kind of floating around that you would assume. Low-hanging fruit.
And finally, now that we have like PIXzip or even mainline xzip has it now, and Zstandard has it, is threaded.
Yes,
so that you're using more than one of your cores to do the compression.
We've had these multi-core machines for kind of a while now.
Yes. Well, for a while it made a big difference to make sure that whether you compress it normally or with multiple cores, you would get the same compressed file output.
Right.
Especially, if you're going to publish like the checksum of your compressed archive on the website, you want to make sure...
Yeah, make it easily reproducible. And
and exactly, for reproducible build stuff, right? Which is another thing that's caught on in open source and so on now, where sure, there's the source code and there's the binary that you download and run, but how can we prove that source code was used to build that? So with reproducible builds, it's like you run this script and it strips out certain settings, like so we don't put date stamps in the binaries,
totally.
And we don't put the host name of the machine that
build
built
number
it, and build numbers and so on. But so that someone can download that source code 6 months from now, run the same build script on their completely different machine, which might end up being the same architecture,
exactly.
and end up building the same ISO file that you download.
Perfect.
And make sure that you can verify that.
Yeah, I'm really glad that seems to have caught on. People are realizing that it's work, right? Like it's not a lot of build systems have to be changed or modified or customized.
It's not exactly fun, and in the end, it's not some new feature that people
faster.
are going to be.
There's no new feature.
It's kind of the not fun work. So it's been nice to see the Debian project leading that, but also getting buy-in from other projects. And I think they've had 2 or 3 of these world reproducible build summits, where they've brought people together to actually spend
just get a bunch of people hacking on it.
A weekend of actually trying to get it together. And I think part of it is they built this program called the Diffoscope that actually can look at binaries and find where the differences are, so you can figure out, that's that timestamp, and go back there and replace it.
Perfect sense. Yeah, then you can backtrack and figure out.
So usually what they do is like even for things that are going to have a timestamp no matter what, or where they can't easily change the format, they'll just hard code the date to a specific date.
So that it's always consistent.
And it'll be, as long as everybody uses that same date, you get the same binary either way.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Diffoscope, I'll have to play with that.
Yeah, because it can become a big thing, especially on some of the Linux distros where the packages you install from your package manager are built on like a random developer's home machine.
Totally, they'll get pushed up to some archive somewhere.
And in FreeBSD, we have a set of machines in a data center, and they just build all of the packages. So like there's one machine, and it just builds all 30,000 packages for AMD64 for this version.
Yep,
and
just
does that
build
like
farm and
once every 3 days it builds them, and then on the other days it builds like i386, and then the next day it builds ARM64 or whatever, and it just cycles through all of them.
Turns through the schedule.
I think we have like 20-something builders that are all like,
constantly building
32 or more cores with 128 gigs of RAM.
That's beautiful.
They're turning power
Spitting
into packets.
binaries out.
But a lot of projects just don't have that kind of infrastructure. And so they have a more distributed build system, and it you could be more worried about what else was going on in this developer's laptop when he built this. Because the other thing is our build system uses our jails thing, and a completely clean operating system install is where the package gets built.
Nice. Yeah.
So like when it builds each package, it starts up a completely clean environment, installs the dependencies from the binaries it built earlier in the process, and then does the one build, and then throws it all away.
That's perfect.
And actually, it does a close off from the network as well. So in a separate step, it fetches all the dependencies, and then when you're building it, it's not allowed to talk to the network. So it doesn't. A configure script can't decide to randomly pull in extra files and change the results of your build.
That's beautiful. I like that a lot. What a good system.
I am constantly dealing with my own build system at work.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. It's mostly make, and it's not super sophisticated. But it's got a little bit of everything. We've got Perl scripts in there. We've got Bash scripts in there.
Gotta have those.
We've got NSYS. Have you guys ever played NSYS?
Do tell.
Is the Windows packager that was introduced in like 1990 or something like that. And the syntax of that is nuts. So
I think I've seen something like that.
Yeah, you can.
I remember back in my Visual Basic 6 days building install shield installers.
Oh gosh, yes, I've been in those days myself. Yeah. VB6.
Ant. So I have Ant for Java building.
We use Ant to build the custom Java modules we put on top of the commercial video streaming software we use.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and a part of my build script also copies Groovy files to Java and passes them through the Java compile step, just to make sure that if we do have to take code out of the Groovy files and put them into the main tree, they will compile. So we don't actually get the semantic sugar out of Groovy, not a bit
Not
of it.
at all. You're just, wow.
Yeah, same thing happens on FreeBSD. We incorporate a lot of contributed software. Like we pull in things from upstream, and sometimes those are Ninja or CMake or whatever.
Yeah, right.
But you build all of FreeBSD with BSD Make.
Sure.
So we pull in that build file, it sits there, and we don't use it. And we pull out the files we want and have our own Make file. And then, or the port tree, like we were talking about, is 30,000 Make files that each compile one program.
That's dizzying.
Yeah. It does everything. It downloads it, checksums it, does the extraction, builds it, or patches it, configures it, builds it, and then stages it, builds a package out of it, puts it all done in Make.
Yeah. So there must be then some work done to keep those current and keep the Make files.
There's a team of like 300 people that
right.
just do that constantly.
And each of them knows when to put a backslash in front of a parenthesis. What command do you use to where you need to escape your parentheses?
Lots of them.
Several, yeah.
Oh, yeah?
But which one are you thinking of?
I'm thinking of find.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Find.
Yeah, I can't go a day without using find.
Yeah.
I do love find.
It's probably, I've been playing with some like fuzzy find tools as well, but pretty much, anytime I'm on a server or anywhere else, it's, find, boom.
Like we use it to trim automatic recordings. We have one customer that only wants to keep a 30-day archive. So it's every video file over 31 days old just goes away.
Minus M time or minus C time.
Yeah.
How many jobs out there?
Yeah, because the syntax is a little bit different on BSD. Where with M time you can specify different units instead of only days.
Oh,
so like 30 days or 180 hours.
With me, I'm touching a file, and then if I need to, I have to use touch or something else to modify the C time on it, and then do a minus newer.
Yeah. Not fun. That's what you're saying. How many jobs?
Oh no! How many pieces of like monitoring framework or backend processing that are just like a cron job and some find commands to push things around.
It gets back to that composability of Unix commands. Like the number of pipelines I've built that are like 8 segments long.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's always hack pipe. Like you have this 13 line long single command.
Yeah.
If it fails in the middle, well. Okay, how do we deal with commands that fail in the middle of a pipe train like that?
Just exit.
Well, of course, but
abort.
Like, at what point do you put the standard error redirect and know what command that came out of?
Yep.
That's a good question.
Good commands will prefix the error message with the name of the command.
Yeah. That's a good point.
But if you have 3 sorts in there, that doesn't help you.
Oh, yeah.
No, it doesn't help you at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, because even if they tried to put like the PID or something, it's like that doesn't mean anything in the middle of the pipeline.
You can't recreate the PID when it's in a log file.
Yep. And then the other one was a couple of years ago we talked about this cool tool.
I was about to ask you about that.
Pipe cut.
Pipe cut.
So you build it. So it lets you build they call them blades, each of the little bits in the pipe, and you can surf forward and backwards with a preview of like. If you've got your file and then you're doing grep and then sort and then unique and then sort and all this, and you're just left and right going back and forth through them and seeing a preview of what it's doing. Or for the greps, as you're typing the regular expression, it's showing you what parts of it are matching.
It almost seemed like a mini IDE for writing shell pipelines.
For writing shell pipelines.
So is that available?
It is open source.
Is it a terminal-based one, or is it like a tickle? Okay.
No, it's I think curses or whatever.
Okay.
It's meant to run in a shell.
That's interesting.
And then there's another one talk from BSD Can, I think 2014. They called it Unicage, I think it was. It's popular in Japan, where they've actually written point of sale systems all in shell script.
Wow.
So the barcode reader, it plugs in as a keyboard and just writes out the barcode number as standard input, right? And they're doing all they built some analytics software with it and found that doing a big shell pipeline over NFS with 10 gigabit network was 25 times faster than Hadoop.
I've seen some other things like that. Yeah, for the right workloads, you can really go a long way just with the classic
shell
commands.
pipeline. With the shell pipeline, they could save intermediate results easily.
Yeah, totally.
And
Yeah.
so,
Team off somewhere.
you know,
or whatever.
if you change the shell pipeline, or if you decide you need different results, you can start with the intermediate thing instead of having to go all the way back to the beginning.
restartable at any stage in the process.
Exactly.
That's
And
great.
you just see that they had a really nice style guide for writing their shell scripts, where it was all like the pipeline was on like column 79 or whatever, and so you
You
know,
could watch as the data gets threaded through. And,
yeah, it was just it was pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think really we've kind of come back. A lot of software has finally come back and rediscovered some of the workflows. Maybe different tools, maybe different names, a lot like functional programming things, but a lot of them are kind of just what we've been doing in the shell the whole time.
Yeah, you want
Passing
a
data
tool that
around.
does one thing, takes an input, and writes an output, and in such a way that it's easy to feed that into the next thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Too many programs try to humanize the output. And it's like, having that as an option is great,
yes.
but maybe off by default would be better, but even if not, or there's some detection you can do on whether the output is a terminal or
yes,
not.
right.
Because like ZFS send protects you from shooting yourself in the face with a whole
Just a bunch of
replication
binary.
stream.
Yeah. Yeah, more
that
and more
always
tools
really
seem
screw
like
up-
they have that. Like,
Yeah.
we're just not going to, if you really want this, then tell me you want this.
Yes.
Yeah, you get used to using a -n in there pretty quickly.
Yes, and that's the other one I love about ZFS is almost every command that changes something has a -n, where it just prints out, this is what this would have done. Or like when you're adding disk to a pool, this is what the pool would look like if you did this.
Yeah.
And you're like, nope, that's not right. Change. That's how I want it. Take out the -n, and then it does it.
Those are great too for like working on bigger teams or things. You can get that output, have someone else review it, check it off.
Yes.
Maybe it's even in a CI system or somewhere, and then actually go run the results.
Yeah. Okay, so ZFS question.
Sure.
So when I have a failed disk in a pool, say it's I've lost a mirror, and it
You mean half a mirror, right?
Yeah, half a mirror, an element of a mirror.
Yep.
That I get this random looking number where the device used to be.
Yep, the GUID, Globally Unique ID.
Okay, and so the GUID in general is something that I can say put into a replace command.
Every device in ZFS has a GUID. Every dataset has a GUID. Every snapshot has a GUID. Everything's GUIDs.
Yeah.
And
Just
that's-
unique IDs you can pin to stuff. And then
mostly deal with the fact that you could otherwise end up with two things with the same name and not be able to specify which. If you've ever actually been on a system where there are two pools, both with the same name, when you do zpool import, it'll print the GUID for each so that you can actually tell which one you want to import.
I have never been in that situation. That is fascinating. But
Yeah,
I
but
have
if
been
you-
in the situation where I've tried having two different disks in a system with identical partition labels.
Yep.
And it used to be Linux would freak out when you tried that.
oh, interesting. I've never tried that.
This is before Linux, like the UDEV system, started
right.
doing its own GUIDing.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you just DD a GPT partition disk and you end up with a second partition with the same GUID, you're not actually supposed to do that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Sure, yeah.
Oh, but there are times you want to actually recreate a disk with
Exactly the same.
Right.
GUID.
But if you're if you are going to reuse it, maybe you don't, and so on.
Yeah.
Like if you do ZDB-L on a ZFS disk, you can actually see the GUID of the root pool. So if you have a mirror, you have the pool has a GUID, then that mirror-0 device that's kind of virtual, that has a GUID.
Right, to
and then
represent
each
that.
member has a GUID.
Oh.
And if you run ZDB-L, you can see each of those GUIDs. And also, it's a hidden property, but if you do ZFS get GUID and then a data set or a snapshot, it'll print out what it is.
Oh, wow.
Really?
So,
nice.
okay, so
Because I have a fun story about that one. But go
okay,
ahead.
but building on my my story there is that I've imported pools that are missing their ZIL or missing their L2R, and I have to be able to remove them.
Yeah.
And so I've found that I can do a ZFS remove
zpool detach.
Yeah, but I can't say L2ARC name or something like that.
It's got to be the GUID.
Yeah, it's not intuitive looking at the ZFS status output quite what I should type in there for that. It has taken some monkeying around, but I was glad that it was possible. I didn't have to rebuild the whole.
That's
pool
one of those
or something.
situations where you're like, okay, what do I do here?
interesting feature coming up. They've finished the work to be able to import a pool with a missing top-level device that's not just your log or cache device.
Oh,
So if you lost both halves of a mirror, you could still import the pool. It'd be read-only, and any data that only existed on the broken VDEV would be gone or missing, but you could still get
everything
some of the
else
other
you
data.
could still get.
So in particular, if you do one of those screw-ups where you have a bunch of RAID Zs and you accidentally attach a single disk to the end of it because you forgot the log or cache keyword when you're trying to add that SSD.
I've had that happen.
And then you do the wrong thing and like blow that disk away, and now it's not part of the pool anymore, but now you can't import the pool because you're missing a top-level VDEV. You can import that, and all you're missing is the last like 20 seconds of data or whatever.
That's excellent.
Yes.
That's a real, that's a safety net.
Yeah, or actually, like some of my pools, the way they worked was, it started out as 12 disks, and we wrote a bunch of data to it, and then we added 12 more disks and wrote a bunch of data to it, and on and on. So that means all of the old files are on this VDEV, and the next set of files are on this VDEV. So if we actually lost the whole VDEV because like 3 disks faulted at once unexpectedly, at least we could get 2/3 of our files back.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. Or someone walks in and starts shouting at your
hard
containers.
drives.
It really seems like ZFS has got a lot. Just recently, in the past couple of years, has added a lot of those features where like it wasn't like mission critical. It didn't prevent you really in most situations, but it's just like that nice to have. Where before you had all the the philosophical underpinnings, the great design of ZFS, and now you have as well just like pretty much all the management tasks thought of that you could possibly run
Exactly.
into.
ZFS goal from the beginning was always to make the sysadmin's life less hellish.
Yes.
But a lot of quality of life improvements have gone in over the time, and it turns out now that there was always this concern that once Sun and then Oracle went away with it, that it was kind of going to die off and not really mature. But at this point, more than 50% of the code that's in OpenZFS today is written since the fork.
Wow.
Whoa.
That's a wonderful
Some
thing.
of that is replacing and some of that is adding.
Sure.
But and then like this year we got device removal. So you'll be able to remove single or whole mirrors by remapping the data onto other devices.
And then we'll just balance that out.
And then RAID Z expansion is under construction right now. I saw the first working demo of it last weekend. So this, if you have like a 6-disk RAID Z2, you'll be able to add a 7th disk to it
You just
and just get more space.
Wow.
And just more space, more space,
That
more
is
space.
awesome.
Yep.
That's got to be some crazy math.
Actually, that one's not so bad.
Oh,
It's
yeah?
just some shuffling.
Okay.
It's just
Working
a lot
out
of
where each thing goes.
the very beginning involves a lot of carefuling, and then after that, it's just go really fast.
Okay.
Luckily, that one's logically not that complicated. There's video and slides about it at the OpenZFS Dev Summit from last November. If you want to, it's not quite an animation, but a series of slides that shows how the data will be shuffled to make it work, and how it's actually not going to be that complicated.
I like hearing that.
I do too.
That's what we thought at first. Then it turns out as you start doing it, you run into extra complications. Of course.
Extra carefuling.
Yes.
Yeah.
But the very first cut of it that you can have now does it all as one transaction group. So once it starts, it's like like hours later, it's done.
It will eventually
You can't really
finish.
do anything else in between. But that's just to prove that it works, and then going to keep working on it, and it'll do it in sizable chunks that'll make more sense, and so on.
Please don't unplug your stock exchange while
Yes,
you do this.
exactly. And then the other one was, we were talking about the GUIDs on snapshots.
Yeah.
So I got very confused for a while. I was doing incremental send-receive, and suddenly the script was refusing to replicate this new data set. And so I looked, they definitely have a snapshot. These 3 snapshots are in common, right? They're exactly the same name.
Yeah.
Why won't it use that as the incremental starting point and keep going? And it kept puking at me, and I was like, what's the problem? And eventually, I compared the GUIDs and realized they're not the same, and realized my automatic snapshot tool was creating snapshots with the same name on both sides.
Oh, and if it's on cron, it's the exact same second, probably.
Well, it's not so much that,
if you
but
have a time date in there.
that's supposed to be the data set that on the receiving machine is not supposed to have snapshots created. It's supposed to replicate the snapshots from the other machine. But it looked like it was doing that because it had snapshots with the same name. But then the size isn't right either because it was 0. And I was like, that snapshot script is including this extra data set that it shouldn't be snapshotting.
I've been bitten by that a bunch too.
Which has led me to include the host name of the machine in the snapshot name.
That's a good idea.
I changed my scripts when I heard you tell that story on the show. I went and I added host names to things. And
because it turns out,
it's a great technique.
Because when humans name things, they might actually name two different things the same thing.
We're not so good at that, really.
Yeah, like we were looking over there. The one that drives me nuts is KVM.
Yeah.
Right? That's keyboard, video, mouse. It's a switch you use to switch between computers.
Totally. Been in data centers all the time.
And then some people over in the Linux land there decided that stands for kernel virtual machine. And made some other thing that the same group of people talk about and call KVM.
Yep.
And it's like, arg.
I have at my day job, we have a bunch of servers running KVM, and so they just get called KVMs. Yeah, right. It's very confusing.
I need to attach a KVM to the KVM host.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so, humans will name two completely different things the same thing, whereas ZFS, because it's a GUID, it means there should be no other data set in the world that has the same snapshot, or the same GUID as your snapshot.
Yeah.
And when you think about the fact that I'm creating 10,000 snapshots and you're creating 10,000 snapshots, and there's no chance of them colliding, a very, very small chance.
Yeah. It's a big space to explore.
64 bits is a lot of bits. And
who could ever need more?
ZFS is a 128-bit file system.
So is there a script out there that will collate conflicting snapshots if you wanted to? Something like ZXFer, but a little smarter.
Yeah, ZXFer is not that smart. Like, you mean to detect that situation?
Yeah, because it would be really handy if I had, say, an interrupted backup and I got to it a week later and someone had gone in and created some snapshots on the backup machine because they thought they were doing the right thing.
So it depends. So in ZXFer, and the way I configure it for my replication, any snapshot that exists on the destination that doesn't no longer exists on the source is deleted before the replication starts.
But isn't that off
normally,
the tail of it?
Well, no, it does it up either direction, mostly because it's not that smart.
Okay.
Which can be a problem also if you do push replication, and then the thing you're pushing from is down, right?
Yeah.
And then you start doing the work on the slave, and then the other one comes back up, and that's why I usually try to prefer pull. Because then that doesn't happen.
Right, you have a little more orchestration there.
Yeah, otherwise you have to kill the SSH key or something so that the other thing can't do it.
That's a good trick too.
Yeah. Oh, that reminds me. Does ZFS on Linux support ZFS allow yet so that you can delegate permissions?
I don't know.
Last year when I was playing with that, it didn't.
Okay.
So I do
all my backup replication stuff without having to have root, and no sudo or anything.
Yeah, all of my stuff is done with sudo commands. And so definitely, I create a BU user that has the cron jobs, but all the cron jobs are sudo.
Whereas mine, it actually the SE mirror user. Has the ZFS permissions to send and receive, create and destroy snapshots, but not other stuff. Or I can even say only in this sub data set. So in that there's pool name /m for mirror, and it can only create snapshots and destroy snapshots in there. So if the user gets compromised, they can't destroy any other data sets. And so on.
I would totally like the permissioning system to be.
But I guess the Linux VFS layer is a lot different, and so somebody just has to sit down and do a lot of work.
Someone probably is and is getting interrupted as we speak.
Yep, that happens too.
Okay, looks like as of 12 months ago, 070 RC4 had it. So
there you go.
Hey.
I think it should exist now.
Okay, well, I got to play with that.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I think maybe with 1804, Ubuntu is finally shipping 07X ZFS, because I know they were only on 065 in the previous version.
I have not yet played with 1804 because it's just been busy, but I'm going to give that a shot.
And it came out on Thursday afternoon.
Yeah. It seems like a long time, It's Sunday already. I probably ran it in a container. Maybe I did. Yes, okay, there we go. I did. But that doesn't really count, right? There's no kernel or anything.
I think that OBS machine is running it, actually.
Yeah, you're right.
Noah and I were waiting for the release, and it got delayed. And
And speaking of Noah, there he is, working very hard. Balancing his laptop.
He's playing a video game, actually. He just has that face that he looks like he's working hard. That way no one bothers you. It works every time.
Yeah, that's go the hell away face.
I feel like I'm finally having more success now that Ubuntu is shipping the compiled driver. Like there's a lot of skepticism of people. You know, they're like, I don't know if I trust it. This kernel module, but now it's like.
Well, yes. The complication was always, you upgrade your kernel version changes, and you need the newer thing.
Yeah.
But the ZFS on Linux people got their package repo more in line now.
Yeah.
And you can get the new version compiled for CentOS and Ubuntu pretty easy now.
Yeah.
Because yes, the other problem is, people have the Ubuntu ZFS and they want newer ZFS because of all the features and the bug fixes are.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I definitely would suggest anyone who is following the latest OpenZFS tag, when they do their compile, wipe out their user local lib ZFS libraries.
Yeah.
Also, do a find command, wipe out your ZFS and SPL kernel module directories under lib modules.
Oh, sure.
I'm trying to remember in
because you can have library conflicts.
Yeah.
Right. I think it's 0.8 or 0.9. They're finally going to merge the SPL into ZFS, so there'll only be one thing instead of two separate repos.
Two separate. Nice.
I think that'll be 0.9.
2 or 3 other libraries too you need to pull in for that too.
But those two are the big components. There's ZFS and SPL, and more importantly, in the ZFS on Linux GitHub right now, there are 2 separate repos.
Right,
and
totally. You got to go fetch each, and then
but luckily SPL doesn't change much anymore, and that's now it's stable to be able to merge it in.
Is SPL used by other projects, or was it?
No.
Okay.
So we have something kind of like it, but because Solaris is based on the same FreeBSD base from 1970 something or 80 something, they're a little less far apart. So we have under sys cddl contrib OpenSolaris a bunch of header files that make the things, and then a couple C files to it turns out the parameters for allocating kernel memory are slightly different in a different order.
Right. Yep.
Or convert their lock commands into our lock commands and so on.
Yep.
But it's a much thinner layer.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah.
And we had the advantage of being able to incorporate it into our kernel, so it just ships.
You don't have to deal with all this nonsense.
And so in the end, you get a kernel module called OpenSolaris that brings all the compatibility stuff, and then a kernel module ZFS.
Nice.
So about 2 years ago, and this was probably actually on a BSD now, that you were talking about speeding up the configure, like the make configure step, because that's always the most expensive part of running a build, because it's usually single threaded. Do you remember that conversation?
Was that with Richard Yao from OpenZFS?
Possibly. Well, I don't know.
It wasn't. We'd be talking about.
Yeah, but I'm curious if any of your conversations in the past couple of years have brought that up again, because speeding up the make configure step would definitely be a super duper lifesaver.
Right.
There was mentions of how to cache that output.
There's some. I think what you're talking about is when we were talking about doing cross building. Okay. So when you were compiling ARM binaries on an x86.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Originally the way you did it was QEMU would run the whole script as native ARM, and that would be slow. So we have optimizations of a version of the shell compiled to know about ARM but actually run on x86, or a version of GCC compiled that generates ARM binaries but actually runs on x86.
To run on.
And so that we basically run the shell scripts and a version of GCC that run native on AMD 64, but do the stuff so that the configure scripts and the shell scripts for ARM binaries would run much faster on x86.
That's interesting.
Depending what you're doing, a lot of packaged versions of even the source code for stuff. If you download a version that's designed for, say, CentOS, it'll basically run configure on CentOS and ship an already configured version.
Right. Yeah, I see that a lot.
And then you have to run auto reconf to make it redo that.
That's one I'm not familiar with. The auto reconf.
It's something you mostly run into when porting software to FreeBSD. Okay. Because it'll run autocomp for Linux. And
right. You're this is no good for me.
Or more importantly, if you're actually changing some of the flags.
Yes, exactly.
In the FreeBSD port tree, you get a menu where you can I want to compile FFmpeg with these extra things added. And so you have to throw out the old configure and do a new one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It would be great if there was some kind of multi-threaded.
Sure. It'd also be
automate.
great if the configure scripts weren't like 250 kilobytes of auto-generated
Meaningless,
junk.
crazy. Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, you would think
AutoConf is terrible.
how it works at all, I'm continually amazed.
it is about as black magic as you're gonna get.
Like in the olden days, it made sense when you had to check for like IRIX that didn't support this.
Yeah,
and
sure, yeah.
Because the one that got me for a long time was the AutoConf bug when we switched to FreeBSD 10. It would look at it, and because it's the comparison they did in Shell was kind of wrong, it thought FreeBSD 10 meant FreeBSD 1.0, which meant it was like, oh, that doesn't support dynamic shared libraries. I'm going to statically compile everything. And some apps would be like, sorry, we don't support statically compiling. It's like, this is
didn't ask
FreeBSD
you
10.
to. Yeah.
This is FreeBSD 10. It's not 1993.
We've had this a long time now.
Yeah. So that we actually had a step in our port through where you have to go through and patch all the automake files to be like, no, 10 and 1 are not, just because it starts with the number 1 does not mean it's FreeBSD 1.
wrong substring match.
Those
Right.
things are so fragile. People, like, I run into broken version checks all the time.
Yes, and it kind of, you probably didn't assume it would be a problem when you wrote the script to detect FreeBSD 2.0 in 1997 or whatever, and then it just
Lurks there until
that,
it breaks.
AutoConf is just copy and paste for 20 years, it turns out.
And
Okay.
different versions of Linux also have different autoconf behavior. Like in Ubuntu, autoconf will run reliably as root, but not as a user. And this is, as I grew up, was a big no-no. You never used to compile anything as root ever.
right.
There was just no excuse for that.
On FreeBSD, AutoConf is a third-party package, so it's not installed by default. So it's like a dependency you install if you're going to compile some GPL apps.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
And so that does mean that you can get different versions of it over time.
Oh, yeah, that's
But it means
tough
you always
too.
get a newer version, which is usually okay.
Yeah.
Hopefully it's better. Or they fix that darn
Yeah.
bug you were
Well, at
mad
some
about.
point, you get configure scripts that are like, you need AutoConf at least 2.13 to run this.
Yeah, right.
And it's like, well, at least I can get that now, I guess.
Yeah.
Whereas if it was shipped in the OS, it's like, I'm on the 5-year LTS branch. I don't got that version. What am I
What are
going
you
to do?
compiling a whole separate version somewhere?
Yeah.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, anyhow, I find altering like the make flags for a bunch of networking things that I want to compile under like Ubuntu, it just got a lot harder because the default library choices in like 1604 added like a bunch of like dash golden kind of options, and it would just like. It's just so frustrating because so many of the packages we're using are like CentOS and Fedora based that I have to
You're trying to get to
chase
go.
down the config flags for it,
Tiny little differences.
and it's frustrating to figure out.
Wow. Imagine trying to do this BSD where everything assumes it's probably running on Linux. And it's never been tested on FreeBSD. Maybe it's only one or two little things that need changing, but it's also like the fact that almost everything by default, that's everything not included in the operating system goes in user local
Yeah.
lib
yeah.
or user local
That's very
include.
nice.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that's not always in a lot of configure scripts default search paths.
Oh,
So
no.
like
That's
every
another-
program, you're like dash include
Yep.
user local include. And
That's
so on.
right. Yeah, and when you start compiling ZFS on Linux, all your output goes into user local,
Yes.
and then you
'Cause
have to.
That's where it's supposed to go. Everything that part of the operating system goes in your local directory.
And that means that anything like the DKMS packages, all those scripts, even your your systemd targets and systems, those scripts will have the wrong paths in them because those are all going to point to /user.
Right?
So you have to uninstall.
It doesn't search
just
both? What?
Oh goodness! So yes, you have to uninstall all of your apt or your RPM
Right,
packages.
whatever old ones that you have that are
because-
left things behind.
And that's actually one of the reasons that I got pretty good at writing systemd's unit files, is because I wanted ZFS to come up the right way.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Right.
So
you
I
you
had to
compile
go
your own
through those.
version, and then you can write your own init file.
All right. Well, any final thoughts before we wrap up from our live show here at Linux Fest Northwest?
I think it's just been a great fest this year.
Yeah.
Awesome turnout, tons of great talks, and the one, the only Allan Jude to join us.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah,
And we got Jed on the show.
it's been a pleasure. I've been harassing you guys from a distance for a number of years.
So how many of the podcasts on Jupiter Broadcasting have you been on now? Have you ever been on Linux Unplugged via the Mumble Room?
No, I haven't.
Oh, you
We
should
would
do that.
love to have you. Absolutely.
Okay.
Please
You know,
join
it-
us.
but
Because
it's
we
usually
interviewed you
in-
on
it's-
TechSNAP. Or,
Yeah,
sorry, we
that
interviewed
was-
on BSD Now outside on your
Yeah.
bike. That was
That's right.
great.
That was
Yeah.
a good. I like that interview.
Yeah, and I've been, with the Nerf guns.
Oh, yeah. So you've been on the Linux Action Show
Yeah,
before.
I've been
so
on the
if you
live
get-
stream
Yeah.
at Fest a couple
Yeah.
of times.
Yep, totally.
So
Yeah.
if we get you on Linux Unplugged someday,
Yeah.
You will be a
Yeah,
great
I'm-
voice of reason to add to the
I'm
clamor.
usually in the middle of being an actual professional
Sure.
when that's
Yes.
on.
Sure.
So
Yes.
that's my difficulty there.
Well, if you ever
Yeah.
end up with a sick day or just a day off,
I need a sick day.
yeah, I think you do.
Yeah.
Maybe Tuesday around 2 p.m. Pacific, something like that.
Yeah.
Turns out
All
lunch
right.
didn't sit well with you. That's a shame. Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
all right.
With that
Thank you.
charming note, I guess we're out of here.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this bit of a divergence from our regular format, but man, it's always good to hear from Allan, and I love Jed and Wes too, so it's so fun for me to be able to sit back and get to listen to an episode of the TechSNAP program. Now, if you are a patron over at patreon.com/JupiterSignal, you may have heard this earlier in the year. It's just one of the many perks of being a Jupiter Signal patron. Thanks to Jed, Wes, and of course, Allan for sitting down and recording that, and we'll be back soon with our regular format, and in the meantime, we need those questions and war stories so we can hit the ground running. TechSNAP.systems/contact, and of course, grab every episode when we publish it right from our feed, TechSNAP.systems/subscribe. Thanks so much for joining us, and we will see you soon.